Good morning and welcome. I want to begin by asking you a question, and I ask myself the same question. How often do you talk about sin? Now I know that immediately if I ask that question, there's part of you that wants to shut down. There's part of you that's not interested in listening anymore. And I know that's true because it's true for me. It seems that we no longer want to talk about sin. That somehow it seems archaic. It seems old-fashioned to use the word sin. And yet in the past, sin used to be our shadow. Christians agonized over their sin in the past. But today, all we really want to do is avoid it. Yet, knowing that we are forgiven is wonderful. But before we can experience the wonder of being forgiven, we need to know what we are being forgiven for. Knowing that we are forgiven is wonderful, but that information alone does not help us experience God's liberating forgiveness. You see, in order to be forgiven, you must have done something wrong. And if you have no concept of what you've done wrong, forgiveness is without meaning. If I say to you, I forgive you, and you think, well, I haven't done anything wrong, it's very nice that you've forgiven me, but really it wasn't necessary. But when you have hurt me deeply, intentionally and maliciously hurt me, and I say to you, I forgive you, you know at your very core that that forgiveness was an act of grace, that that forgiveness has deep meaning. Now God gives us the practice of confession to help us understand the extraordinary reality of His forgiveness. People may think, well, I know God has already forgiven me. Why confess? Why confess? He knows what I've done wrong. This is all back to front. We do not confess because God needs us to confess. We confess because we need to, in order to heal and to change. And when we confess, two things happen. We are liberated from guilt, and we are less likely to do the same thing again. John Ortberg suggests that there are 6 steps to confession. And the first is to place ourselves in God's Spirit. And we ask for help because confession is dangerous. If we do confession without God, we can become self-condemnatory. Or we do not confess fully, but simply gloss over things that really need our attention. So once we've prepared ourselves in the presence of God, we need to spend time in self-examination. We take time to reflect on our thoughts, on what we've said, on what we've done. And once we've done that, we're able to acknowledge that we have sinned, that we have put ourselves first. It might be helpful to use a list which helps us to truly look at ourselves. Some would use the 7 deadly sins: pride, anger, lust, greed, sloth, and gluttony. And you might say to yourself, well, where do I stand? How did I do today in regard to those things? Martin Luther used the 10 Commandments, and another good list is the fruit of the Spirit. Where do you stand in relation to the fruit of the Spirit? Then he suggests that your confession should be specific and concrete. I lied to so-and-so about this. Once it becomes specific and concrete, we are able to take personal responsibility for our actions. We chose a particular course of action, and it does not need to be excused or explained or even understood. It is the choice that needs to be forgiven. The slate wiped clean. And then he suggests that we need a new way to look at our sin, a new understanding of it. Because all sin involves denial. We lie to avoid pain and often don't even notice it. We flatter or seek to manipulate without being aware of it. We ignore injustice or human needs for very long periods of time without realizing it. And so here we ask for honest perception. We want to see our sin through a new lens. We want to see our sin through the eyes of those that we have sinned against. We want to see our sin through God's eyes. Effectively, we need to take the log out of our own eyes so that we can see ourselves far more clearly. And then we need to ask, why and what happened? Why did I do that? Usually the why is tied to a need that we might have. We're trying to meet legitimate needs with an illegitimate way. We're trying to meet legitimate needs in an illegitimate way. If you do not address the need, you will go on sinning. We may need to feel God's love more so we can be freed from the petty jealousies that make gossip such an attractive activity. And then we need to say, well, what has happened as a result of my sin? We need to unravel the knots of our motives and the consequences. And this requires patience and a quiet spirit. And then we need to realize that there is a new feeling. Confession is not an exchange of information. It involves feeling. It involves the pain of the person that we have hurt. It involves God's pain. And this is the great gift. Contrition is as useful to the soul as pain is to the body. We need to feel what we have done wrong. Confession is an act of grace, and it can only be made in the context of grace.